Alright you lot, how's it going? I get asked about this quite a bit, so I thought today I would go through my most commonly used art supplies. So my go-to drawing and painting bits and bobs, pens, paper, the lot, and it's actually not that many things. You know my style is quite simple and I don't really need that many different supplies. So let's crack on. To start off with, let's take a look at paper. I do most of my work in sketchbooks because I struggle to keep a handle on lots of loose bits of paper all over the place, and as I mainly use ink and paint in my artwork, I like to use either watercolour or mixed media paper. I personally don't mind texture paper, but you can also find watercolour paper that's a lot smoother. So at the moment I'm using this Daler Rowney mixed media sketchbook, as well as this smaller Strathmore sketchbook. And info on everything featured in this video will be in the description, but they're both pretty similar in quality. The Strathmore feels maybe a little bit sturdier. You'll have seen me recently also using my Leuchtturm Noins and Siebsen sketchbook. This isn't a mixed media sketchbook, but it deals well enough with wet application. As I've said before, ink from my brush pens does feather slightly into the paper, but it's not something that you notice when you're looking at the finished drawing. It's more just how it feels when you're drawing, like less control over line thickness. In the past, I've also really enjoyed using Moleskine sketchbooks, especially their watercolour ones. Then I always have at least one really rough, cheaper sketchbook on the go to encourage me to draw things without worrying about getting it wrong and wasting paper. So for everyday practice, I use this A3 sketchbook from Muji, and then for doodles and just as a sort of train of thought art journal, I use this Sea White Eco sketchbook, which was super cheap and deals surprisingly well with ink, feathering a little bit but never bleeding through to the other side. Speaking of ink, let's move on to pens and pencils. I really only use one pencil. It's this Staedtler mechanical pencil with 0.5mm graphite, I think HB refills. I just prefer the convenience of not having to sharpen it and always having a really precise line. If I'm ever doing a proper pencil sketch, like maybe a life drawing study that needs better shading and all that, I use this set that I've had for absolutely forever, and you can see for the most part it's barely been used, and I'm pretty sure it's from the 99p store. I'd say the main focus of my art is in the inking and line work, so the pens I use are really important. I have this white gel pen that I use for details that I've seen quite a lot among artists. It's very basic and it's very affordable. Now, you know I love my Pentel pocket brush pen. I've tried a few brush pens over the years and this one has always been the one that I go back to. I love that it's water resistant and that it's refillable. I've also been using this Zig Clean Colour brush pen, which is not water resistant or refillable. I've already been through two of them in a few months while I've had the same Pentel brush pen for at least a couple of years now. But something about the brush tip of this pen gives me a lot better control over my line thickness. If I really want to vary my lines or fill in big spaces, I'll also use India ink, which is water resistant and a lovely and deep black and can sometimes have a bit of a glossy finish. And I've just decanted this into a little jar, and then with it I'll use whatever paintbrush I see fit, which leads us nicely into paint and brushes. My paintbrush collection is nothing special. I've never been good at taking care of brushes, so I've always just had this system of buying cheap brushes and then replacing them whenever I need to, which is a bit wasteful, I know, but I also know that I'm too lazy to really give proper brushes the care that they need. You'll have noticed that I use flat brushes a lot. These ones are definitely due to be replaced, but I like that you can cover large spaces with them, but also use the pointed edge to get into tight spots. I also have a set of very small precision brushes that I use for line work and detailing that you'll have seen in my last video. Again, these were quite cheap, but I do take slightly better care of them, not leaving them in water and trying to keep these little plastic covers on them as well. My current favourite paint will be no surprise to you. I mainly use gouache for my paintings, sometimes adding in watercolour if I'm in the mood for that too. So the brand of gouache I use is Winsor & Newton. I also use Reeves, mainly to mix with the Winsor & Newton, as the quality of the Reeves paint can be a bit hit and miss. And I have this big tube of white Pebeo gouache paint because I found my smaller tubes of white paint were running out really quickly and I wanted something that would last. I mix my paint in this plastic palette I got from Amazon, and I wash my brushes in this cute glass jar that I got in a set from Sainsbury's. And that's kind of it for my basic supplies. As I said, it's all stuff that you've seen before, but now for a couple of quick extras, I thought I'd show you some of the sort of behind the scenes stuff, starting with a tiny bit of tech that I use. So when I first started uploading my artwork online, I spent a whole heap of money on a really big snazzy scanner, but I found that it really washed out the details of my art. So after a bit of research, I ended up with what I was looking for, which is this Canon CanaScan scanner. Yeah. Now this is more of a beginner's scanner, I think. It isn't necessarily the best scanner out there for quality art, and obviously the size of it is quite limiting, but it gives me a much truer digital copy of my art than any other scanner I've used so far. Once my art is in the computer, I don't do too much digital reworking, but whenever I do, I use GIMP, which is a free software that's quite similar to Photoshop, just obviously not as extensive, but it does everything I need, and there are a million tutorials here on YouTube of how to use it. So if, like me, you don't need some heavy-duty digital editing, I'd really recommend checking it out. For my camera and lighting, which I use to photograph my art, you can see all that in my How I Film My Videos video. So for inspiration, when I need a bit of a visual prompt, I always keep comics and art books at hand. At the moment, I have this vintage Avengers comic on my desk, which is great to flip through, sometimes just for a bit of a laugh. I borrowed this from my sister, but I usually get a couple of new books a month for like 50p from a charity shop or car boot sales. And just to throw in one more thing, when I'm cutting my art down to size, I use this mat and a knife, or this trimmer thing. Now, if you're looking for a more extensive look at the art supplies I own, including markers and things that I don't use so often, plus a few ways that I store my art and how I store my art supplies, then you can check out a blog post that I wrote to accompany this video that features everything I've mentioned here, plus all that extra stuff, and that'll be linked on screen now and in the description of the video. And one last thing, I did say to a few people that have asked over the last few months that I would do a Q&A video if and when I got to 10,000 subscribers. So since we actually made it, I thought it would be nice to answer any questions you all might have, whether they be art related or about me or whatever. So I'll be recording and posting that in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, you can ask me your questions in the comments of this video, and at some point I'll post a picture on Instagram asking you to comment on that with your questions, and I'll be accepting anonymous questions on Tumblr as well, but I can't guarantee that they'll all be featured. And if you're leaving an anonymous question on Tumblr, let me know in that question that it's for the Q&A video. And all the links to my social media pages will be in the description of this video as usual. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the video description for all the items mentioned in this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!